I set out to recreate the incredible Celeste controller. Now, I know what you're thinking, this has been done many times before, but I plan on taking it one step further by turning it into a 3D controller. My first task was to recreate the original controller as it is today, working on a 2D plane. So I began filming some reference material, some basic running, light jump, full jump dash, etc. Once done, I drew the trajectory of Madeline performing a jump dash and recreated a scene which matches the layout from the game, or close enough. This should provide consistency for my tests. I spent some time getting the jump feeling similar. At first I just added additional downward force when the player was descending, but I found this still a little bit floaty at the top of the jump. I ended up checking if the Y velocity was less than my jump velocity fall off variable, and then applied the additional gravity at that point. It yields a snappier, less floaty jump. Using this same artificial gravity line, I also checked to see if the user has stopped holding down the jump button and apply it early to give the player control over the height of the jump. I created a dash by adding velocity according to the player input and disabling additional input for a short time. I also found disabling the player's gravity during the dash yielded better results. Wall sliding and grabbing was achieved by checking for a collider on either side of the player using overlap sphere, and then detecting if the player was pushing in that direction. I set these to global variables as they're used in multiple places through the flow. If the player is pushing against a wall, I simply slow their Y velocity. Once I was happy with the movement, I recorded the same moveset as the trajectory line I drew earlier. I then popped them into Premiere to compare frame by frame. Close enough. A member of my Discord server suggested that I add Coyote time, which is basically a cute name for allowing the player to jump even if they've slightly missed the platform. I did this by checking when the player stopped being grounded, and if the jump is triggered within the delayed Coyote time, I still execute the jump. It actually makes the game feel much better. At this point, I had a controller which was starting to feel pretty similar to Celeste, but still felt crap to play when I'm just controlling a boring white capsule. So I got stuck into making the game look, sound and feel nice by adding a proper player model, particle effects, post-processing, camera shakes and animation. Now, at this stage, I pretty much went into full derp mode and tunnel visioned for about 3 hours without recording a damn thing. But who wants to see that anyway? So I'm afraid you won't see the journey, but I will show you the destination. Ready? By the way, be sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying this video. Alright, here we go. Shortly after the release of Celeste, the developer showed the world his player controller script, and I remember staring at the ungodly line count and thinking, wow, this screams for some organization. This was nothing against the developer. After years of professional development, I know all too well how things can spiral out of control, and before you know it, the refactor you always had in mind turns into a monumental task which is not even worth attempting. Even so, there was a bit of harsh feedback regarding the giant file and its lack of modularity. The developer responded to the feedback defending their move. To us, due to how much interaction there is between states and the nuance in how players move, this would turn into a giant messy web of references between classes. If we were to make a tactics game, then yes, a more modular system makes sense. And although one large file is generally considered bad design, and the very definition of unmaintainable, the developer said, "One reason we like having one big file with some huge methods is because we like to keep the code sequential for maintainability. If the player behavior was split across several files needlessly, or methods like update was split up into many smaller methods needlessly, this will often just make it harder to pass the order of operations. In a platformer like Celeste, The player behavior code needs to be very tightly ordered and tuned, and this style of code was a conscious choice to fit the project and team. I wasn't entirely sure I agreed with this, and there are certainly design patterns to help keep it organized and sequential across multiple files. So my secondary goal was to enforce some code organization, but it just didn't happen. I began by using a more structured approach. Each character's state, like walk, jump, dash, wall climb, etc., were all in their own separate scripts. But it simply made it a nightmare to work on. Each ability relies on other ability variables to operate correctly. This is where the developer's first point shows its merits, a messy web of references. I felt like at this stage it was separation of concern for the sake of separation of concern. It certainly didn't make it easier to work on or add maintainability, as it was hard to keep track of the sequential order of things. In the end, I have no idea how similar my implementation was to the original, but the end result feels pretty damn great. It's responsive, and you always feel in control of the character. I also added a toggleable double jump because I feel like it made it even more fun. It was a blast to work on, and I'm sure with just a little bit of love, the controller could be turned into something truly special. I'm going to save turning this into a 3D controller for a later video, so if you're keen to see that, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've included this script in the description if you'd like to check it out. If you just want to play around with the character, I've also included a link to the built game files. If any of you decide to use this player controller in one of your projects, come into the Discord server and show me what you've done. It'd put a smile on this game developer's face.